America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Please note for the record that all council members are present.
All right. Duly noted. Adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Have a motion in 2 seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Got an operating menu. Okay, city manager, budget overview.
Is this on? Okay. Good morning and welcome to our Warriors Championship next day party.
Well, we
really know how to throw them, don't we?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be very brief this morning. Stuart's going to get into a lot more detail with you on a number of items. This is our second consecutive 2-year budget. It's also a priority-based budget. We've formatted it a little bit different this time around. This is kind of an evolving process for us in terms of the trying to make this more of a policy document and less of a numbers document. Budgets will always have numbers, but it's really more about the policy in terms of services the city's going to provide, and also our long-term fiscal planning. Excuse me. And we'll get into that a little bit more in detail. But over the last several years, as the council knows, we've done a number of things in terms of our long-term issues, putting monies away for our equipment and for our buildings, also starting to put money away for some of the long-term liability issues like pensions and health care for retirees. There are challenges for certain as we move forward, but we believe that this year's two-year budget is a reflection of a stable financial situation at the moment, one that requires a kind of constant oversight and attention, which we give it, which you give it, and we will continue to do that, obviously, as we move forward. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart. He's going to dive into some details and numbers today with you. I do kind of challenge you that, I know numbers are sometimes intimidating to people. We're trying to, provide information to you that is not so much number focused, although you're going to see a lot of numbers, but more policy focused and more kind of looking at the trends of where things are going, because the numbers will always change. So just if you can kind of get the concepts and kind of the trends and the policy issues, I think that that's more helpful to you as a council in terms of providing oversight and guidance to this process. Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Council, Mayor. As Clay said, this is our second 2-year budget that we put in as priority-based budgeting. And one of the things about priority-based budgeting is it really tries to start talking about the purpose. Why do we have the departments? What are we trying to accomplish? So the first step I asked myself was, what's the purpose of the budget? And so the purpose of the budget is really to allocate resources to meet the results required by the community as directed through the City Council. So that's really what we're here about. It's to make sure that what we're doing today in the next 2 years meets the needs of the community as you guys tell us. And so the first step in this is you have to know what results you're looking for. And the City Council a couple of years ago, when we went through it, came up with 5 results. The results are being fiscally prudent, which means that Brisbane's fiscal vitality will reflect sound financial decisions, which also speak to the values of the community. It's to have a safe community, which is that the residents and visitors will experience a sense of safety. It's about community building, which means that Brisbane will honor the rich diversity of our city, which includes our residents, our organizations, and our businesses through community engagement and participation. The result we're looking for is having ecological sustainability, which means that Brisbane will be a leader in setting policies and practicing service delivery innovations that promote ecological sustainability. And then finally, it's about our last result that Council directed us on was economic development, which means that Brisbane will work with the businesses and residents to provide for economic vitality and diversity. The second step, then, in a priority-based budget is to really define each of the programs that the departments do and how that relates. So, we've already defined the citywide programs. We did that last year, and those are, we have that. And this year we've really gone more into what the department and the divisions and how those are. And what you'll notice differently in this year's budget, and I'll walk through it, is how the budget has been set up. So, our focus is on programs that meet the citywide goals. And this is the first budget we've done. It really breaks it down by department and division. And so here's what's different this year than what we've seen in the past. And I've taken finance as my example. So this year what you have is a budget that's truly a program-based budget. It breaks down each of the programs that we have by department and by division. And then it shows you, for instance, in administration, what our cost of salaries for the administrative program is, what our payroll taxes are, what our benefits are for that program, what it costs us for insurance, and insurance is our workers' compensation and our liability insurance, and then what the cost of supplies and services are. And it goes program by program for each of the departments. The next thing that we did is we added charts. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that looking at a whole table full of numbers is not always very useful for people, so we have charts this year. Hopefully the colors work for people. I know I've tried to do colorblind for people who are colorblind, and it just did not work. But hopefully these colors are not that bad. But once again, it shows you by account category, so it gives you the entire department all at once. So it shows you how much, like for a finance department, how much we spend in salaries, what we've budgeted over the years, what we've spent in supplies and services, and then it also breaks it down by program. So you can see either by program or you can see by account category. And what's really new this year is we've provided program purpose and commentary. When we do our final budget, we're going to remove the commentary, but this is really the main focus of priority-based budgeting, which is to look at what it is that we're doing, and then have the City Council work and talk with staff as to what that really means and what you're really looking for out of all of these. And what here is I've shown two examples in the Finance Department, talking about the accounting function, which is to record, maintain, and report on the city's financial transactions according to the requirements of state and national standards. And we do this to ensure the city's funds are safe and financial information is presented in an understandable manner. So what I did is I went through the entire budget of everybody's programs, and I tried to be sometimes I was repetitive, sometimes I decided that after repeating myself 3 times in a department, I didn't need to continue to repeat myself. But I try to break down what are the kinds of questions that this raises, what are the kinds of measures that we're going to be looking for from the City Council to know when we've achieved what we're trying to achieve. So for this instance, when you talk about standards, the question is, do we measure that we are in compliance with these standards, or is just doing the annual audit verification enough that we're doing what we need to do? Is there other ways that we should be measuring whether or not we're meeting what the state and national requirements are? And then when we talk about providing information in an understandable manner, understandable to who is the question. A lot of the times, the only people who read my audit is the bond buyers and the rating agencies. Their level of understanding is a lot different from the layperson who picks it up. So, and it's required to be at a level for the rating agencies, but does that really provide an understandable information for everybody else? So should we be looking at doing something else, like doing a layperson's annual report, which would be very different from what we do? And then, how do we know that once we've distributed information that it is understandable for people? Should we be surveying the public and asking them, do you understand what we're doing? So those are the kinds of things that, when you start talking about how do we measure that we're achieving what we're trying to set out to achieve, becomes an interesting question. And then, the question is, for forecasting and budgeting, provide a long-term financial picture of the city's revenues and expenditures, as well as ensuring annual budgets meet the requirements of the community. And that comes to the next question. How do we know we're meeting the requirements of the community? What does that look like? And those are the kinds of questions, I think, from a city council's perspective, when you're talking about what policies you're looking to achieve. Those are really the big policy questions, because once you tell us, here's what we're trying to achieve as a city council, here's what we're trying to achieve as a community, we can then fashion the programs, we can fashion services that meets your needs. So that's really different this year than what we've done in the past. But then again, we get back to a lot of the same old stuff. So let me get back into some of the old kinds of things that I've shown in the past. So in even years, in the budget process, we do the operating budget. The operating budget is what you have in front of you this year. And the operating budget, council reviews citywide goals and performance measures. Staff develops programs to meet the goals, which is what we're talking about today. Staff develops proposed operating budget, which is the city manager's proposed budget. And then council reviews and hopefully adopts the operating budget at some point. And in odd years, we do the capital budget, and we just did that last year where you approved the capital budget. And, staff presents capital projects with applicable funding options, and then council reviews and adopts the 2-year implementation plan, which you just did last year. I really like to focus on the general fund because that's where most of our money gets spent and what the city council has the most discretion on. So for 2018-2019, revenue projections are 18.7 million, and expected expenditures are 19.7. So we're using a little bit under $1 million of reserves in the 18-19 budget to meet all of the requirements that we have heard from the City Council. And in 1920, we're looking at getting revenues of 19.4 million roughly, and expenditures of 20.2, 20.3. So using less reserves in 1920 than in 18-19. So that's a very positive sign that we're able to be better off in 1920 than we are in 18-19.
But we're still spending.
We're still
Well, I mean,
spending-
it's almost the identical amount, really.
It's a little bit less, but yeah, I mean, it's closer to 800,000 than $1 million, or 850, I think. But yes, we're still spending down our reserves, absolutely. And when we get to the longer range financial plan, you'll see that we actually, in year 3, we actually crossed it. Our major revenues in the general fund are sales tax, which we're projecting at 4.4 million. Recycling business license tax, we're projecting at 2.9, and the reason we're doing that is because the City Council passed a resolution for that number already. Transient occupancy tax, we're projecting at 2.9, which is about what we're taking in this year. And property tax is 2.3 million. And just to let you know that the sales tax at 4.4 is a little bit lower than what our sales tax auditor is projecting. Our sales tax auditor projects at about 4,450,000. So again, one of the things I like to try and do is be as conservative as I can on revenue projections. Then we have a whole lot of new things in the budget this year, and I want to run through all of those so the City Council is aware of all the new items that we have in our budget. The departments will go more in depth, or if you have questions about them, you can talk to the departments. We're looking at a contract for our OPEB and personnel costing software, web hosting of electronic building records, homeless encampment, emergency pothole repair, pavement management system, deep root watering, courtyard surveillance system maintenance, trash enclosures for the community park, our annual weed abatement costs, emergency repairs and water system, lead service identification project, which is obviously a water project, annual weed abatement within the GVMID, emergency repairs in the GVMID, lead service identification project in the GVMID area, emergency repairs and sewer, contract to provide 2 EOC trainings per year, deep cleaning of the Parks and Recreation facilities that we have. It's been a while since we've done something like that, and we probably need it every year. Child care modular supplies, $2,500 in the first year, $5,000 in the second, because in the first year we've got the new module, the rental coming in, and hopefully in the second year we'll have the permanent. Pilot container storage project at the marina for $15,000, and a workshop at the marina for $30,000. So if you notice, there aren't a lot of new items that are in the budget this year.
Can I ask you a pilot container storage project?
Yes.
Can you explain that a little more?
I am sure Randy can. I believe it's that you're looking to be able to store things. For
Yes,
the
so
tenants.
pivoting off of some comments we've heard from the council in past sessions about having containers down there and container homes and such, and also taking into consideration the requests we've had from a lot of the boaters about having a place to store stuff. So we are going to get one container. It's one of those seagoing containers that's been converted into a storage shed, and we're going to put it down there and and just as a pilot system and see how it works. Does it get used? Does it get rented? Is there a bigger demand for it? Does it fit in with the marina? And then see if we want to expand the project or not.
Oh, okay, 20 foot or 40 foot?
It'll be a 40, sir.
40? Okay. Yeah.
Are we going to make it look nice? So,
That's the plan.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and Randy, that will, are these general plan items, or
That would be,
that will come out of the
those would come out
marina?
of the marina.
Okay.
Marina.
What's workshop marina?
Workshop for the marina?
Yeah.
That's not a workshop like this. It's an actual work shed. So it's an area for
Oh,
the crews to
like
put their
a
maintenance equipment.
workshop.
Right, yeah, the old Fort Apache is what the old maintenance yard used to be called, because there was a large old piling there with an arrow through it. That's been demolished. And so we're just putting a place out there for the crew to work.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Then there are some items that are not in the budget that we have heard from different committees. The History Committee, I think Madison talked about this briefly at the last council meeting, is they're looking for $50,000. $10,000 would digitize some of the archive material that we have. The goal for that would be to ensure that the information that we have is available for people online, and they don't have to just come in here. So if you're trying to do research about our city, you don't have to be here in person. Video History Project, which Madison, I think, spoke more extensively on, which is we're trying to capture the history of Brisbane and do this in a way that not only can you watch it, but you can also watch it online, watch it in person. The cost for getting equipment, I've talked to Keith Moreau about it, and he's thinking it's going to be about $10,000 for us to be able to have our own equipment. He is willing to volunteer his time to do the video recording. But in order to do that, what his suggestion is, because we do have like 40 or 50 people on our list, is to have like a basic permanent studio set up. So that way we don't have to keep taking it down and putting it up and taking additional time for that. And then the staff for History Committee, we're thinking it's going to be about $30,000. And what this would do, as Madison spoke about, is to schedule everybody. It's to help us through the digitization process. It's to do research on what are the topics that we want to talk to people about. Just having a conversation with a person isn't very interesting unless the person knows what you're going to ask them and you know what topics you really want to cover. So we see that, so the History Committee really sees that as an important aspect of all of this, and not expecting staff to be able to find enough time to be able to schedule that many interviews and to do that much research. Then the Parks and Recreation Commission has a number of things on their list again, as they have in the past. They're looking for Firth Park improvements, improvements to the Sunrise Room, money for new special events. As you know, we like to do some pop-up events, and they're thinking we should do more. Putting a drop-down screen for Mission Blue, as opposed to trying to set it up every time. This would save time and effort and money for that. We need to replace the sound system at Mission Blue. Anybody who's been up there knows that the sound system, after being used for 20 years, is in need of replacement. We need to replace the light board. Right now, doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to. A special events portable sound system, and as you know, when we do things like outdoor kinds of events where we need a sound system, I think you remember from our last attempt at the Festival of Lights, the sound system was not quite up to speed. So we have the same problems when we were doing stuff at, Day in the Park. So that's what the Parks and Recreation Commission is requesting. None of those items are in the budget at this point in time. But what is also in the budget, as Clay talked about, we've been setting money aside for vehicles. We've got a new fire engine that we're purchasing. The marina is purchasing a club car electric vehicle. We need to replace the Crown Victoria for Parks and Recreation. It's reached its useful life, and we know we can't replace it with the Crown Victoria. They don't make those anymore. That's how old it is. We need a new van for Parks and Recreation. Police needs to replace one of their Tauruses. Again, it's not going to probably be with a Taurus. Police needs to replace an Explorer, and Public Works needs a backhoe. And all this money is available in the Vehicle Replacement Fund. There's no need to put additional money for these vehicles, and that's why we set aside the Vehicle Replacement Fund. And then in 1920, Fire needs to replace their Chevy Tahoe. Marina needs to replace an E-Z-Go. Police needs to replace 3 more vehicles, and Public Works has a truck that it needs to replace. And again, all these money has been set aside previously for these. One of the things that we do talk about, and a lot of times, is this: how have we done in the past? So what I did is take a snapshot of the last 7 years and looked at, how did I do in my projections of my budgets versus my actuals. Fiscal year 2010, 2011, we were still like at that tail end of the recession, and our actual revenues were below our projected revenues. But since then, our actual revenues have been above our projected revenues. And I'm hoping to continue that streak in the upcoming budget by being slightly conservative on my projections. And then actual expenditures versus projected expenditures. As you see, in most years, our actual revenues are below our projected expenditures. And, this speaks well to the departments. They buy the things that they need. If something that they thought they needed at the beginning of the year, they find out they don't need, they don't purchase it. And one of the things that I think really encourages that is that we don't hold that against them at later times. A lot of times when you're doing budgets, what you'll find is cities will say that if you don't spend all your money in one year, not only do you not get the money carried over to the next year from what you didn't use, but you also, since you didn't spend it all in that year, you must not need it in the next year. So if you budgeted $100,000 in 1 year for something, and you only spent $80,000, we're only going to budget $80,000 in the next year. What this does is it encourages departments to spend money at the end of the year, so they spend every dime that they got budgeted for them, because they don't know if they're going to need it in the next year. I learned this example early in my life when I was doing a project in my graduate school in Syracuse. The best paved parking lot in all of Syracuse was the Public Works parking lot, because every year when they budgeted for their blacktop for roads, if they did not spend all their money, they redid their parking lot. So every year they redid their parking lot. It was a well-paved parking lot.
Sure.
At that time, I learned that it doesn't really serve a purpose, because what you're really doing is you're encouraging people to spend money they don't need, as opposed to doing what we should be doing, which is if you don't need the money, put it back into the reserves, so that way the city council can distribute it to where it needs best to go. Mm-hmm. So over the years, over the last number of years, we've done well. We've spent less than we've budgeted, and we've taken in more than we've budgeted. And, the fund balance has shown this through the years. We've gone, in 04-05, we had $9.6 million in our fund balance. We went up to a high of in 14-15 of $14.5 million. In 16-17, we're at $11.6 million. These are the actuals. And during that period of time, we've also spent $4 million out of fund balance. So in addition to growing fund balance by a little over $2 million since 04-05, we've also been able to spend $4 million in addition to that. These were things that were needed. So right after the recession, we spent $1.4 million catching up on a number of capital projects that we needed to do. We've put $1.2 million into the OPEB trust. We've put over $1 million from the general fund into the motor vehicle replacement fund, which is why we can now buy those vehicles without impacting the general fund's fund balance. We put $300,000 in the maintenance fund, and we're putting $250,000 a year in there as well. We've put $100,000 in the pension trust fund, and we've got more money going into that as well. So we've done a very good job in finding what the needs are of the community, and as we save money, we put them into these. And I apologize for the size of this one, but this is our fiscal model. This is one of the things that we talk about. As you see, the blue line does cross the red line in fiscal year 2021 and 2022. But we are slightly below, we're projecting to be slightly below the fund balance reserve in those last couple of years as well, because as the budget grows, our reserves that we need grow as well. But then again, I'm not quite sure that we're going to actually, I think we will be better off than we are. So I think, given how close those lines are, I don't really see that as being a long-term problem at this point. And since our revenues are growing faster than our expenditures, I think that, in the long term, we will be okay. One of the things that Councilmember O'Connell asked me to do is to try and explain PERS. You've asked me to do this as fast as I possibly can, so I will take heed of that. So here we go.
101.
PERS 101. If you enjoy this, then we can go to the upper level of 201 next week. This is where everybody behind me starts sleeping. So, how is PERS funded? I think this is the first basic question that everybody has: is how do we pay for PERS? PERS is the employee.
Maybe. Okay. Go ahead.
Is the employee? It's the retirement system for the employees, for both our public safety and for our non-safety employees. So the way that our city PERS account is funded is you have three different pools of money going into it. You have what the city contributes, what the employees contribute, and the investment earnings. All those three go into the PERS account. The next question that people ask is, how do we know how much money the city should be contributing? So we contribute the normal cost plus the amount we need to pay off our unfunded liability, and that gets to our annual city payment. And you're probably asking what the normal cost is, and how do we determine that? So the normal cost is what it costs for an employee to be here for that year that they're here, and what we think what we're going to need to save for them to pay for them in their retirement. So the normal cost is based off of the expected working lifetime of an employee. So do we think they're going to work for 30 years, 10 years, or whatever? It's based off of the expected age of retirement, the expected life expectancy for employees, expected pay raises over their lifetime, and then expected return on investments. So that's what makes up the normal cost. What makes up our unfunded liability is it changes based on investment income below, which is what creates an unfunded liability, or above expected. And if we had more than we expected in investments, we would have a net positive in assets. That hasn't happened for a number of years, but it has happened in the past. And then also changes to assumptions. So as I said before, we have a lot of assumptions about how long a person's going to work, what age they retire, how long they're going to live, what their pay raises are going to be, and what the return on, and the other one is return on investment. So if somebody actually works longer than we anticipated, that would decrease our liability, because in fact we would have to pay them less years. If they retire earlier, then our liability goes up, because we're going to have to pay them for more years. If they retire later than expected, our liability goes down. Expected life expectancy, if people live longer, liability goes up. People live shorter, liability goes down. Pay raises, if we give higher than expected pay raises, liability goes up. Lower than expected pay raises, liability goes down. The city has 5 different tiers of PERS, depending on when you got hired. We have Tier 1 for miscellaneous employees or non-safety. Calling them miscellaneous seems bad, so I like to say non-safety. PERS calls them miscellaneous. So we have Tier 1 is 2.7 at 55. That means for every year that you work, you get 2.7% of your single highest year at the age of 55, and it doesn't change after 55. So if you started working at 25, you retire at 55, you're entitled to 81% of your single highest year. And it doesn't have to be your last year of pay. It could be any year that was your single highest year of pay. So, for instance, if you were working in, obviously, we are in one of the higher pay areas, but if you're working here and you take a job in the Central Valley and you get paid less, your single highest year would be based on what you earned here. And it works the other way too, whereas if you come out of the Central Valley and you come here, it's based on your single highest year here, so all of your PERS retirements would be based on that. And every city you work for pays into that. Our Tier 2, so when the City Council adopted the 2.7 to 55, we recognized that was not a sustainable model for the city. And so what we said is that new employees would be getting 2 at 60. The previous one was 2 at 55. So we went from 2 at 55 for employees to 2.7 at 55. And then the city council said, yeah, we can go to the 2.7, but only for the employees that are here. Going forward, we would like to have a reduced pension cost. So we went to tier 2, which was 2 at 60. And the city council was one of the first cities in the state to go to the second tier. And that was just, again, trying to make those long-term financial decisions for the city. So that's 2 at 60. Now, 2 at 60 actually rises to 2.3 at 63. So it does actually grow a little bit after you hit 60. So if you work until you're 63, you'd actually get 2.3% of your single highest year. And then tier 3 is the PEPRA, which was put in by the state. So this is, at the moment, the only tier that's available for new employees, which is 2 at 62, which is not that much different from our 2 at 60. Safety, we have tier 1, which is for the employees who were here at the time, was 3 at 55. This is another one of those ones where the employees came in and requested 3 at 50, and I think Councilmember Conway was on council at the time. And we said, if you're willing to pay for going from 3 at 50 to 3 at 55, that would make sense to us, but we're not going to pay for it ourselves because we recognize the cost. And the employees decided they did not want to pay for it, so we stayed at 3 at 55. And I think we've benefited from that versus a lot of other cities that went to 3 at 50. When PEPRA came in, they went to 2.7 at 57. So those are the 5 tiers that we have. So talking about unfunded liability, and this is for the miscellaneous tier or our non-safety tier. So this is how you figure out what your unfunded liability is. And our unfunded liability as of the June 2016 was $10.2 million for our tier 1 non-safety employees. So it's a bunch of different things. It's an asset loss in 2013 of $3.3 million. That means that we had less than expected return on investment, and we had 27 more years to pay that off. So what PERS does is determine how many years you have to pay off the loss that you have. We have a share of the pre-2013 pool. UAL, so we are in a pool. The reason that we are in a pool versus being out on our own in PERS is because we are a small city, and what they had noticed back in the 2010 time frame, that small cities actually have a very large fluctuation in their PERS costs year to year, because when you have somebody retire early, it creates a bigger unfunded liability. If you only have a very few employees, that becomes a big percentage of your overall income. Whereas if you spread it out amongst a lot of employees, any one early retirement or disability retirement doesn't have that big of an effect on the entire pool. So that's why we went into a pool, and we can never get out. Once you're in, no matter how much we grow, you can never get out. So that cost for us is $4 million in unfunded liability. There were some non-asset losses, and those are probably changes in some kinds of assumption. What happened in actuality versus changes in assumption. We actually had an asset gain in 2014, so that reduced our unfunded liability by $2.5 million. There were some assumption changes in 2014, which increased the liability by 1.6. We had an asset loss in 2015 for 1.5, non-asset gain for 128,000, an asset loss for 1.8, non-asset gain for 232, an assumption change for 547. That all adds up to $10.2 million. I will tell you that for what we've heard is as of June 2017, they actually had an asset gain, so we will see a decrease in our unfunded liability based on that, but we don't get those numbers until August or October. So they're always running at least a year behind in what they give us. That's why you're seeing 2016, that got sent to us in October of 2017. So I can give you an update in October of 2018 where we are, but that would still only be through 2017. So rules for paying our unfunded liability. Prior to 2018, if you noticed on this chart, there was like a lot of different kinds of years that we had to pay it off on. 27, 18, 29, and the question is why? So for pre-2018 gains and losses on assets, we would have 30 years to pay it off, and it would be a 5-year ramp up and ramp down. So when you do a 5-year ramp up and ramp down, if you do a ramp up, you're actually borrowing money longer. So you actually increase your unfunded liability, and you know you're going to increase your unfunded liability. An assumption change, if they made an assumption change, that would we'd only have 20 years to pay that off, as opposed to 30 years, and they didn't do a ramp up and ramp down. Post 2018, there was a change in the law, so there are gains and losses level dollar over a 20-year period. From assets, there's a ramp up period, so we're still going to be borrowing money, but there's no ramp down period. And then otherwise, there are no ramps. So that will help us pay off our unfunded liability sooner, and the sooner you pay off a loan, the less you pay in interest. So all these things are going to help us in the long term, but it will cost us money in the short term. So I did an abbreviated payment schedule for what our Tier 1 looks like for our non-safety employees. So in 2018, this is coming off of the PERS actuary study that was given to me that ended as of June 2016. So it will look different, when I get the new one June 17. But as of June 2016, we owed, as of June 2018, we were going to owe $10.8 million, and then the highest that was going to grow was going to be to $11 million in 2022. And then what I did was I picked the highest year that we were going to need to make a payment on it, which was 2031, where we're going to need to make $1.2 million of a payment. And then I picked the next time that we were going to get back close to what we were paying in 2018, which would be in 2040, and then we have it all paid off in 2047. So if we just wait long enough, we're all done.
I think we'll wait.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be there.
We'll be there. And one of the things when you think
If
about...
I live long enough,
Yeah.
I'll be 95.
We won't be, but they.
Hey,
Hey,
I remember that.
Eddie will be here.
I'll be here.
He'll be here.
Madison over here, yeah.
We're still not
Hopefully, yeah.
We're still not burying you, is what you're telling me. Yeah, not you.
See, Madison's got that quip every time.
Every time.
Yeah, I'll be
You
here.
know, a millennial.
I'm hoping to be here in 2040, to be alive in 2047, not working. If I'm working, my retirement did not work out for me.
You do it for the love.
I do it for the love. At that point, I'd be doing it for the love. So, it's one of those, one of the questions when you start talking about paying for your unfunded liability and should you pay it off sooner or should you pay it off later? It's like the same thing when you're thinking about making your house payment. When you borrow your money and you buy a house for 30 years, the question is, should I pay it off sooner or should I pay it off over the 30-year period? Should I put extra payments into it and reduce my interest payments? Or should I take my money and invest it someplace else? And those are all the same kinds of questions that you ask yourself when you're looking at paying for unfunded liability questions. My projections have the anticipated increases in PERS calculated in there. So, we still will be able to make our payments. But the question, and I think, we can spend a lot more time on it, and I don't want to, I didn't think today was going to be the day everybody wanted to spend time delving into PERS, and that's why I'm only showing you the miscellaneous Tier 1. We can do the same conversation about our safety Tier 1, because that also has about $10 million worth of unfunded liability, and our OPEB has about $8 million of unfunded liability. They all work exactly the same way, and that's why I picked one as an example.
They'll all be by 2047.
Well, Tier 1 yes, everything will be, we will be completely paid off of all those unfunded liabilities by 2047 if we make our annual payments as we're anticipating.
All three.
All three of those would, yeah.
But it does mean that our total unfunded liability is more like $28 million.
Yes.
Yeah, $28 million.
It's about $28 million. Looking at it from the same kind of idea that when you look at it from making your house payment, you get back to the question, your house payment is, can you make that payment? Can you afford to make the payment? And does it become easier over time? With a house payment, it does become easier over time because your house payment doesn't usually increase unless you have a variable rate mortgage. So as your income goes up, the payment as a percentage of your income goes down, so it becomes easier over time. And that's why PERS is going to the point where PERS has changed their philosophy from having a ramp up and a ramp down and paying it as a percentage of payroll to having flat payments, because they recognize that that's costing cities interest that they should not be paying or don't have to be paying. But as I said, I think we have the ability to make these payments over time. And then when you look at the overall liability of $28 million, that's not all general fund, but a lot of it is, because most of our employees are in the general fund. Our general fund revenues are about $18 million. So, if you look at it from how you do your house payment in today's atmosphere, if you're able to have a house loan that is less than 2 times your annual income, you're doing very well. Mm-hmm. So, from those perspectives, the unfunded liability is not something that's overbearing on us at this point in time. I think if you look at it and say, if we have a major recession and you have another asset loss in PERS, another big asset loss, at the same time that we're reducing our revenues are going down, it becomes harder to make those payments. And that's why, staff has encouraged, and I think Councilmember O'Connell has encouraged us to put more money aside for these unfunded liabilities. And we have been. In our budget this year, in addition to making the PERS payment as required, in addition to making our annual repayment for OPEB as required, we're also setting aside an additional $100,000 into additional trust funds that can make those payments. So we are looking to say how we can pay those down quicker. Another approach for paying off your unfunded liability, and if you would like, we can bring it back, is to borrow money. We've done it in the past, and it works well if you think that what your rate of borrowing money is going to be lower than what you think you're going to earn on your money. So in the past, PERS was thinking they were going to earn about 8.25% on their money, so that they were loaning us money at 8.25%, and then we were able to sell bonds at somewhere in the 4% range. So we were able to reduce our payments while at the same time saving money. We have that same ability at this point in time if we would like. We could go out and borrow $20 million, pay this off. It's about 4% to borrow money at this point in time. PERS is expecting about 7% rate of return, so we have a 3% cushion. The downside is if we borrow money and then PERS loses money, then it costs us than if we hadn't done it that way. So it's a gamble. We've taken the gamble in the past because it seemed like there was enough of a cushion there. There may be less of a cushion in what we think of today. One of the challenges that PERS has is that they're lowering their assumption for future interest earnings from 7.5% down to 7%, and that will increase some of our unfunded liability. And I called PERS, or I spoke to the actuary who works on our account, and I said, can you give me an idea of what that means? I said, because if I do the simple math, it looks as if it will mean that our unfunded liability is going to go up 10%, and our payments would go up somewhere in the 10 to 20% range every year, based on how funded we are. And he says, what you're saying makes sense. However, you can't say that because if we have a positive year, your unfunded liability goes down. So he wasn't willing to commit to anything, which is why I could not commit to anything on a chart today because they told me not to. But yes, our unfunded liabilities are going to go up based on that change, and those are the numbers that I've actually done my best guess to put into our estimates as to when those costs go up. So even given the 7% range, I think we'll still be okay. The biggest challenge, though, with PERS is that although they are expecting 7% rate of return on their money, over the next 10 years, they're expecting a 6% rate of return. So over the next 6 years, we're going to see our unfunded liability increase even if PERS does what's anticipated. And then what they think is they're going to get back to their normal rate of return, which is closer to 8.25% after that 10 years. So over a 20-year period, they will be fine. So the challenge I think that cities are going to need to live through for the next 10 years is to live through their unfunded liability increasing, and then recognize that it will decrease equally after that fact. I think that's going to be a real challenge for cities that are looking at budgeting year to year as opposed to budgeting over time. And I think, the smart move at this point would be to go with what PERS is anticipating. The reason why they're reducing their expected rate of return to 6% is because of fixed income earnings. One of the things that PERS doesn't talk, this is my short version. I'm sorry.
No.
No, I'm sorry. This
No, it's actually excellent.
No.
No, that's okay.
This is great.
So the reason why we were at 8.25%.
Doing that because I had a pain, not because of your presentation.
Sorry.
Don't be so defensive.
I am.
Physical
sorry.
embodiment, man, not
See what you did?
Don't apologize.
Down, so it's not the blower. The
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning blowing. Can we turn it down a little?
Anyway, so the reason why PERS used to be at 8.25% is because if you remember back in the 70s, you could buy a CD for 5 years and get 10 or 12% on a CD.
Yeah.
So if you can buy a 12% CD at zero risk,
Yeah.
you're easily making 8%. So as the fixed income revenue came down, they needed to earn more on their stock market portfolio. So when we got down to 1 or 2%, and they were about 40% invested in fixed income and about 60% invested in variable income products. So as you go from a 12% rate of return, where you can easily make 8% a year, and you come down to 1%, so if you're making 1% or 2% on 40% of your portfolio, that gives you a return of 0.8%. That means the other 60% of your portfolio needed to earn 7.4%. It needed to net out. So 40%, you're talking about needing to earn 12 to 13% on your variable rate portfolio. The stock market traditionally returns 10%. So therefore, they were of course going to be below the 8% that they had projected. And now they're thinking, because fixed income is still at a relatively low level, they think they're going to be at 6%. So there's two things that are going to happen, and we're seeing it right now, is the fixed income is coming back to normal. You can buy a 5-year bond for 2.5%, but 30-year bonds are still in the 3% range. That's still below what you would expect. Inflation is 3%. So basically, when you do a 30-year bond, you're giving somebody money for no interest. That still doesn't make sense. I mean, normally you would loan money for 2 or 3%. So we would still expect to see over the next 20 years the fixed income portfolio to increase in value, or decrease in value but increase in interest earnings. And so therefore your variable rate products don't need to return as much, so you can take less risk there. And that's what PERS is banking on over the next 20 to, and as you can tell, they look at life over a 60-year period, because they know they're going to be here forever. They know, we have people who are in Tier 1 who are 37 years old. They've got another 50 years to live. So, the last payment that we will be making actuarially on our Tier 1 payment is going to be in the year 2070. So we will still be paying off people in 2070 who we hired under Tier 1. And that's what PERS is saying, is over that kind of a period of time, we can reasonably expect 7%. And that's probably really accurate. On the short term, we might see that change, but I think, PERS, pensions is a long-term product, and you need to think about it as a long-term, and it's a forever product. We're not going away. We're not going to go away as a city unless something really drastic happens. So I think we need to be thinking of those kinds of things when we're talking about how do we tackle our PERS and our OPEB payments. So that does it. And that concludes PERS 101. Now, if you want, I can come back for PERS 201 and be even more in depth.
Well, that's very good.
If anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I really like, your philosophy of looking at the budget over time just really giving us that long-term perspective. Because you really do need to do that. And, just like when you have a mortgage, as you gave that example, initially it's tough making those first payments, but then over time it becomes an adjustment, and then it's what you do over the next 30 years. And if you make some extra money and you can pay down that mortgage so you can not have that debt that you're expecting at the end of the 30 years, you're better off for it. And I'm glad that we're doing that with the $100,000.
And just also to let you know, one of the things, and I have it in some of the new costs for us, but one of the ongoing costs is that we have purchased a contract with a company called GovInvest, which does PERS projections. And you can change your assumptions, you can change what you think PERS is going to make, you can change how much money you want to put aside for it, you can change what you think your anticipated salary increases are going to be, you can change the number of employees you have, and you can do all those things and then determine what your new unfunded liability is going to be and what the impacts of all those kinds of assumption changes will be. And and as I say, if you want to go into a PERS 201, more than happy at some point to show that product off, because we're also going to look to be buying it for our OPEB to make sure that we have a better understanding as to what all the factors for everything.
Stuart, on PERS, how's it work like with an employee that worked in another jurisdiction? Let's use the example of the officer we had introduced the other night that worked for a similar thing. They were at 3% at 55, right? And so transfers, hired into Brisbane. That transfers over too, or does that change?
No, so I'll use myself as an example because I have the same thing. I worked in Encinitas for 7 years before, back in the early 90s, or back during the 90s. So there I'm at 2 at 55 there. So I'm always going to be 2% at 55 there. But they also have single highest year. So when I was there, I think my salary was about $60,000. I'm making more than that now. So they're going to have to pay 12%, which is so if I was there for 6 years, 2 at 55. If I retired at 55, 12%. They'll be paying 12% of my retirement income. So, and then Brisbane will pay, if I work 20 years here at 55, be 54%. So 54% of my single highest year would be being paid for by Brisbane. So every city carries their own liability, and that's part of the challenge when you move from a lower paying city to a higher paying city. The anticipated pay raises up until this year was 3% a year. Because on average, that's about what employees get over their lifetime. So as an employee who now has higher than 3% for Encinitas, I've created an unfunded liability for them.
Mm-hmm. But because they come from experience, though, I mean, what I'm saying, though, is or they fall under that 2%?
No.
57 now?
Yes.
Or?
No. So they will fall. No, they stay with a 3 at 55. If they were hired pre-2013 in their old city, they would stay at 3 at 55 because they would stay at our tier 1. But if we have a non-safety employee who is working in another city prior to 2013, they come in at our tier 2.
Oh,
they don't come in at tier 1, they come in at tier 2 because our tier 2 was in place before PEPRA was put into place.
Okay. Right.
So it depends if you're safety or if you're non-safety.
Okay.
As to where you come.
Right.
So, I got a question to follow up on that. So, using your example, Stuart, so, obviously, when you were working at the other city, you were just starting, so your salary was lower. Now you're a director of a department, you're making more. Would that city, Encinitas, would they be required when you retire to pay your highest pay? Okay, so that's what you're talking about. Now you've created an unfunded liability
For them.
Okay.
Yes.
It's going to be hard for those cities that...
It is.
Yeah.
So the real challenge...
are out of the higher paying areas.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and PERS is trying to address that. And this is going to be an interesting challenge. What PERS is looking to do is creating another rule, and they're trying to determine that if you, as a hiring city, create an undue burden, and they're trying to determine what an undue burden is on another city, then you have to pick up the cost of you have to pick up a portion of that cost that you put on the other city. So, it becomes really apparent if you are I'm not going to, not to pick on police, but to pick on the police department. If you are a police chief in a small Central Valley town or a San Bernardino border town or a northern town, and you're earning $120,000 as a police chief, and you come into the Bay Area and you earn $200,000, that town was not expecting you to work your last 3 years at $200,000. So they've created you could be 27 years for a town, and top out at 120, work 3 years at 200. Your entire retirement is now based off of 200. This town that has 3 at 55 is now responsible for 81% of 200,000. So they're responsible for about 160,000 when they were expecting to spend about 100,000.
Yeah.
So PERS is saying that doesn't seem fair to that city that was paying only 120,000, and they're trying to come up with a rule that makes sense. The challenge with that is it may create some inability to have people move to be able to get to be where they need to be.
Yeah, you might be stuck in a town out in the valley, and you don't want to be there all your
Right.
your entire career.
And you may be a really good police chief and not be able to come to a better city,
Yeah.
a bigger city. So PERS is going through that process now, trying to figure out how to make all that make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a challenge. Is you create, especially if you're a small city, and you have a very small pool of assets, that's a very large increase. So it's kind of,
Yeah,
tensions are
I hope
fascinating.
they do come up with something that's fair, because that's not right.
It'll be a challenge for them.
Treat your employees good, right?
It would also be a challenge for a hiring director in that more expensive city to say, well, we're looking at hiring someone where we're going to have 27 extra years of
Yes.
pension responsibility for the makeup
To
difference.
bring you in.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure legally, can you look at that in hiring?
No, you cannot look at people's past salaries as part of hiring. I mean, that was state law that just passed.
So it would be, you can
A good
make
assumption.
assumptions
Yeah.
Yes.
and not admit that you're making those assumptions, but
You can find other reasons for choosing somebody as a better fit for the organization.
right.
Yes. Yeah, pensions has become a big issue. Pensions is for cities that, I will say, working for Brisbane as a finance person, I feel very fortunate. We have a diverse revenue base. If you look at our revenues, they're fairly secure. Going back to what our 4 biggest sources are, the recycling business license tax is fixed. And that's, our second largest revenue source. Transient occupancy tax, it will fluctuate a little bit during recessions. We saw that. But it's not, we are in the number 2 destination place in the United States, maybe number 3. Maybe Vegas is number 1, New York number 2, San Francisco number 3. South San Francisco is growing by leaps and bounds as businesses. Our point is growing with businesses. So our transient occupancy tax is not going to drop by 50% in any given year. Our sales tax, unfortunately, the VWR left, which was a great sales tax producer and a fairly stable sales tax producer. But because they left, our sales tax has become more diverse. So, yes, if we have a construction slowdown, Golden State Lumber is going to have a reduction. But we have other businesses that will not. So, our sales tax, we will lose money. That's why we have money set aside in reserves. And then property tax is fairly stable. It may dip for a little bit during a recession as properties are not getting reassessed up, or if we lose value a little bit. But over time, it'll grow right back to where it was. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, that's 4 or 5, what is that? $6 million, not 10, 12, 12.5 million dollars out of 18, 19 million dollars in revenues is through those four, which are fairly stable revenue sources.
And the recycling business license tax is going to go up
Yes.
Significantly
Yes.
in the next few years.
Yes. And 2.9 is the beginning of that, but yes.
So I have a question on the property tax valuations. Are your projections for this year including the completion of the HDP properties out at the marina?
No. The reason being is that that's still in the successor agency area. So that's
Okay.
so that money has the first call on that goes to the successor agency. So we will get a portion of it. But I do not put that in because that's not really being put in through the county's projections yet, because they don't know what that number will be when it's all said and done.
Okay,
So we'll see that go up a little bit more as well.
okay. And if a major property gets sold and reassessed,
So if a major property gets sold and gets reassessed, we actually don't see the revenue in our property tax for 2 years. The county has we get money through the supplemental property tax, which if you look at all the tax revenues we get, that's one of our revenues. The supplemental property tax is I don't understand it. I don't understand how the county does it, because I don't think that I would disagree with the way they do it, but that's how they do it. So when they do supplemental property tax and something gets reassessed in the middle of the year, it goes into a pool of money that gets distributed throughout the entire county. And it gets distributed based on what they call your AB8 factor. Your AB8 factor is the percentage of property tax that you have received versus the overall percentage of property tax collected within the county. So let's say our $2 million is 1% of the overall county. So all the properties that are sold within the year, we get 1% of their value, of that increase in value, no matter where it was. So we would get 1% of a house sold in Hillsborough, and we would get 1% of the increase in a house sold in Brisbane. But 2 years down the road, it then hits our property tax, and we would see it 2 years later.
okay.
It's kind of, to me, that's a weird way of doing it, because I would think you would know where the property was. But that's how they do it, and they tell me that's the way that they're legally required to do it. And I understand it. I understand the formula. I just don't understand. I don't get why it works, why they do it that way. It's weird.
And new construction is considered a supplemental property
Yes.
tax?
Yep.
So any new construction?
Any new construction would be considered supplemental.
Okay.
And it works the same way if you have a decrease, and that's the nice thing. So if you lost a piece of property during the year, somebody got a reassessment down, you don't lose the entire reassessment in that year, which is a nice thing. Except we are going to all take a hit because of Genentechs when they get reassessed down. And that's, again, I don't...
Why are they going to get reassessed down?
Because they have been arguing with the county for the last 15 years over their assessed value. And they've filed an appeal every year for 15 years that they're over-assessed. And they will ultimately win a certain amount, is what we're told.
They're robbing me.
I mean, it was...
Break out the violins.
Yeah, well, it was also the interest...
The little ones.
The most interesting one was when the guy who owns Oracle,
Larry Ellis.
Larry Ellis, he built a house for $300 million in Hillsborough, Woodside, I don't know.
Woodside.
And then he appealed the assessment, and building permits cost $300 million. He appealed because he says that it was a unique style of house, and because it was a unique style of house,
It wasn't worth that to anybody else.
it cost more to build the first time than it would cost the second time to rebuild, because they had to learn how to build it. So he appealed the $300 million assessment and won. It's like, your house cost you $300 million. So I mean, there's assessed. As much as I enjoy finances and projections, assessing a piece of property is the strangest thing, and then how it works through the state formula becomes even stranger.
Weird.
Are you finished with your presentation?
I had one last
Okay,
slide,
yeah, go ahead.
which was the next steps. Like, where do we go from here? So there are 3 additional CIPs that we need to review, and we'll do that, at a later meeting. That was one of the things that the City Council asked us to look at. So one of the things that I do, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth today, because I know we're trying to get through the budget at this point, because you have a lot of other important issues you guys are focusing on, is that we need a rate increase in the marina. We haven't done an operational rate increase for a number of years. The last rate increase we did was for the dredging, and it was a large increase. It was 10% a year for 3 years. But part of the requirements of the bond that we sold to do the dredging is that we need to ensure that we collect 125% of our operational costs. 2 years ago, in 16-17, we did not collect 125% of our operational cost. Our bond holder called us, because we sold it to a bank, called us and said, you did not collect 125%. I said, yes, we were not planning to. We put a rate increase over time, and, last year was the last of the years. And and I showed them in 17-18, we're going to make the 125%. Assuming my numbers are right for 18-19, we'll make the 125%. And in 19-20, it's going to be close. I think I've got a $6,000 cushion in 19-20. But we haven't done we haven't increased and had an inflationary increase for at least 5 years over at the marina. So in the fall, I'll be bringing you back probably a 3% increase and talk about, what do we need to do to ensure that we are able to meet our bond requirements. So you'll be seeing that in the fall.
You'll give us a range on that?
Yes. And then, the other one is, do we want to go more in depth on PERS and OPEB and figure out a way to maybe pay it down faster so we pay less in interest? I mean, it's the same thing with your house. The quicker you pay it down, the less you pay in interest costs. And you might say, as you do with your house, that it's okay because I'm going to earn more in the future and therefore I'm willing to pay more in the future. But I think we should spend a little bit of time going through PERS and OPEB when we have more time as a council to really focus on that topic, because it's, as Councilwoman O'Connell points out, it's a $28 million liability to us. And, if we're paying 7% interest on that every year, it's a significant amount of money every year.
Mm-hmm.
And we also didn't really get the OPEB 101, so...
The OPEB 101 will be exactly the same as the PERS 101 because it's the same concept. It's just a different number. But I'm more than happy to go through it.
Which is?
OPEB. $8 million.
Okay, so now we're up to 36 million.
No, because it's 28. It's 10 million for tier 1 for PERS miscellaneous, 10 million for PERS safety, and 8 million for OPEB. So it's 28 million overall. And that number will change come our next evaluation because it'll all go down a little bit because earnings were higher than expected. But,
Okay.
But we can go through all that and come
That's
up
okay.
with
We don't need to go through it all now.
Yeah, but if we, I can bring that back in the fall or early winter when, we're through the Baylands issues and have some time to really spend and dig into that, because I would say that could be a 2 or 3 hour kind of conversation as well. And I just don't think I did not think today was the day to spend a couple of hours on something as arcane as actuarial information.
This is very interesting, though. I mean, I'm sure, if we have anybody that's viewing it at home, that, they're learning a lot from this. I think, I've never, for all the years I've spent on the council, have never really gone that in depth on PERS and stuff and how it works. So, no, I appreciate that. And thanks, Terry, for prompting Stuart to come up with PERS 101.
I always have my concerns about it, just like I have concerns about, and we differ on this. I'll call it a deficit budget, and Stuart says no, we're not in deficit. We're within budget, but we're borrowing from reserves, and it's just a difference in looking at it. But it always has my concerns when we're using reserves to make a balanced budget. Because we are balanced, as Stuart will remind me every time he gets when I say we don't have a balanced budget. It's just that we're taking it out of reserves,
Yeah.
and that's always a concern for me.
I always like listening to both Clay and Stewart's stories about Reno, that when they had $1 million in their reserves, they were happy.
We were.
They had a lot larger budget there. I mean,
Yes, and I do share, as much as Councilmember O'Connell and I have the back and forth at this point in time. I do have the same general thought is how much money do you want to take out of your savings account on an annual basis to pay for your ongoing costs. Your savings account is a one-time pot of money. What I look at is not only do I look at where are we, but what's the expectation that we're going that all my numbers are going to work out. So right now we're looking, and I'll say $1 million projected coming out of general fund balance. I know we're slightly below, but it's minimally below. So let's say $1 million coming out of general fund balance. We're talking about $17, $18 million of revenue, $17, $18 million of expenditures. It doesn't take very much to be off to make that up. And I can see the other side of it is if something drastically changed in the economy, not that we're expecting it in 1819 or 1920, to say, if we're off if the economy goes south a little bit, we may not get all of our revenues, and that might need to borrow. You may need to use more of our fund balance. And over the years, we've gone, I think, as low as $7 million, and council gave us permission to go down to $5 million, and we built that that $7 million back up to 14. And I think that's kind of the history that we've had with Clay and myself here to really focus on what can we do on a year-by-year basis to make sure that we are not using our one-time money more than one time. And that, I think, is actually where the bigger question is do we have a plan for dealing with it, and do we have a plan going forward to be able to make our payments? And then the question comes, are there services and programs that the City Council wants to see different? Which leads us right into the next aspect of the budget, which is where all the departments come in. And this year we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to really be focusing on the programs and the purpose of those programs, because I think the bigger question in all of this is, are we really doing what the community wants us to do? Are there things that we're doing that the community would say, that's really nice to have, but we don't really need it? And so while the times are okay, let's continue to do it. But these are things that when times are tough, let's think twice about. The department, this will be a different presentation than you've seen in the past. I've seen all the department's presentations, and they will all look a little bit different this year. Normally, we try and be very similar, but because we're really focusing on programs, all the departments have taken a little bit of a different tact on it. And part of it I'll be looking for is the City Council, is which ones they really enjoyed, which ones they didn't quite think worked as well, and we'll be tailoring our future presentations more towards what you think is very useful. And as I said, one of the things that we're looking at is over the next year and a half to spend more time with each department, because today we can only really hit the highlights. But over the next year and a half, we'd like to spend a lot more time with the council and have each department come in and really go through all of their programs and really talk to you about what are we trying to achieve with the programs, and how do you know as a council when we've achieved it, and how do we as professionals can tell you when we've achieved what we're looking for. I mean, those are the kinds of things I think are really important for gearing up for the next 2-year cycle. So with that, if there aren't any.
okay. Council question, Karen? Okay.
I think the idea of a layman's version with the graphics included. I'm a very visual learner, and certainly looking at the graphics you put together, it's very simple for people to see, what's in, what's up, what's going on there, rather than these pages and pages of numbers that people just gloss over and they love doing what you do. Can we think about that? I think that would be a really good
Sure.
idea.
This is much more graphical than it's been in the past.
I know that.
Terry's helped me with that over the years.
Mostly with colors.
Yeah, that's-
Mostly with colors,
Show us
but
colors,
graphs.
Terry.
No, I didn't have anything to do with the colors, but I'll let him know if there's ones I can't read.
And I appreciate that, because I actually did went into Excel and said, okay, what can I use for people who are colorblind, being very aware of that. And the Excel version we have does not have a colorblind version for graphs.
Well, and I'm not quite colorblind.
I know you're not,
Color
but,
deficient.
but there are other people who are.
Yes.
And that becomes a problem when you do everything in color. It's one of the things I'm becoming more aware of is just all the times that we're not really communicating. One of the issues that we have as our thing is public education and community engagement. And it's, and the question is are we really engaged and are we really educating? And I can put as much information out as I want, but if people aren't understanding it, then I'm not really either educating or engaging. And there's a lot of different groups of people that the more I think about it and the more that we're in society today, the more it becomes aware of like what people are able and not able to understand and to read and to, and all that. I say, okay, so how can I do this better? So I do appreciate it, and it's just time crunches, and I didn't have, and I tried to find the easy fix. I did not find it on that one. Because I also thought that if I had put all the hash marks and everything, that would not have worked at all. Because the graphs were too dense for hash marks.
Cliff, you have questions?
No, I just it was great getting your overall perspective on how you look at the budget, Stuart. I think it's just extremely helpful, and looking forward to getting all the feedback from the department heads, and then having that discussion amongst the council, and having you come on back at the end of the workshop.
And everybody behind you is still very much awake.
Wow.
Madison?
I don't have any questions.
Terry?
Nope.
No? I had one, Stuart. Just some curiosity about the unsecured property taxes.
Yes.
Is that distributed as the same ratio as secured property taxes?
No, actually, unsecured property tax, I think if it's during the middle of the year, you come in with a new piece of unsecured property, it is. But it's the same way, yes. It's, it's based on what you have there. So if you have a piece of machinery that's not
Say a
secured.
boat. Let's use a boat because I pay unsecured property taxes.
Yes, so your boat is part of the unsecured property for the successor agency. And we get whatever percentage that we're supposed to get in the tax rate area that you are in. And I don't know the exact, because every tax, there's like 20 different tax rate areas, I think, in the city of Brisbane, and each one has slightly different percentages based on what we had collected back in 1978. When Prop 13 went in and they said, okay, here's the percentage you were of overall property taxes within that tax rate area with all your other overlapping. And see, to me, I think the easy way to then do it is all your secured property goes into the tax rate area, or your unsecured, and you get that percentage. But they say, no, you get a percentage based on your overall city versus the overall county. As I said, again, I don't understand how they do their thing. It works, and our numbers go up, and it would probably be close whichever way you do it.
Oh, okay.
But yes, we do get we do get money off of your boat, and about 20%.
Okay. Yeah, so it's close then.
It's close to
Ratio's
20%.
close. Okay. All right, very good. So thank you very much,
Thank you.
Stuart. Yeah. So we're going to start the department heads, but let's take a 5-minute break and before we start, okay?
Sure.
All right.
Are we having lunch at 12 still?
Huh?
Whatever you want, Stuart. Eat that brownie. You're like, yeah, okay.
All right, so we're going to start with fire. Ron, you get to do the maiden voyage here on this.
Hi, Mayor and council members.
Budget.
Are we on?
My-
No, no.
oh, sound like
I hope you have those merger numbers for us tonight.
Jeez.
Or not.
Teasing.
No.
Of course I'm teasing.
yeah,
Yeah, or
either,
not.
right?
Oh my
I think there's
goodness.
just some confusion.
That's polite.
We'll call it confusion.
Yeah, right? Sure. I heard there was some confusion.
Yeah, we'll meet and
Cheers.
get in. Line up.
Wind him down.
Hello? Test.
Hello? I'm not on either.
I'm not on either.
Oh.
Oh yes,
Lost
you
our
muted
city
us.
clerk.
So these are not in order of appearance.
First up for department overheads is fire department, so.
Mayor, council members, I'll go ahead and go through fire department presentation and certainly ask questions as we go along. The mission statement, it's really just about being prepared and then taking care of people. I wanted to include the large organization chart so that you get the essence of what North County Fire is about and how we pool all those resources in order to deal with all three of the cities. We may come back to this if you have other questions, but that's generally how North County Fire is organized. It really does provide for surge of issues or surge of projects or emergencies. We can move that around between all three of the cities, and so you pay for an amount of money that's a fraction of the cost of what all that is there, but you get all of that when you need it. This is kind of a micro view of the fire department, the one engine company that's here in Brisbane, and the 9 firefighters that staff that fire engine, and that may come back to a little bit of a discussion about as I get into the operations section of this. No new budget items. So as it relates to fire and life safety compliance, the question of, we put a lot of effort into doing inspections, and primarily we're focused on multifamily because of the large life presences there. But we do every business, every occupancy. There are requirements in the law to do multifamilies. State law requires multifamilies, schools, and then there are permitted occupancies that need to be inspected. So we do that by way of fire companies and then dedicated fire inspectors. And the dedicated fire inspectors focus in on the more complicated, more in-depth level of the fire code. We think, although we don't have empirical data that would show us this, we have very low occurrence of fire, and we'd like to think it's because we are actually into the buildings, we're actually out there interacting with businesses and the apartment complexes and that, and so by doing so, we have to believe after all these years of doing it that it does have an impact on. We are one of the only fire agencies that I know of around that does every single occupancy one time a year, and if you've seen some articles in the paper recently about fire inspections, fires that have occurred in buildings, and that we have always, fortunately, and it's not without a lot of work and a lot of effort, we go out and inspect each and every building annually. So we sit very well. The grand jury this year took a look at fire inspections based upon the incident that occurred in Oakland. We're right up there. We're probably the leaders when it comes to getting fire inspections done. The importance of the whole process of reviewing new developments, tenant improvements, remodels, and that is that we're allowed to get in and do the pre-fire engineering before it happens, try and create a safe building before we end up with that being implemented, and then coming back and trying to reinstall fire protection systems and that. So a lot of effort is put into, as something new is coming on, interacting the ordinances that might be there. Somebody does more than 50% of a tenant improvement, then we retrofit for sprinklers. If it's a brand new construction, then we make sure that all the fire protection features are in place for that. Get to emergency response. You'll hear me talk about speed and weight of the response. That's trying to match up how quickly we can get there with how many people we need to mitigate whatever that emergency may be, whether it's a medical emergency, a fire, a hazardous materials incident, you name it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're responding to emergency and non-emergency incidents. But it's always about how quickly you can get there and with the right number of people to mitigate an incident. Rolling into the effective response force, that's that's based upon a national standard that talks about if you have a residential structure fire, which generally is what we respond to. We do have commercial fires, but a vast majority of our fires are residential. That you have a minimum of 16 people that respond to that structure fire. So when I got talking about the engine company here, you have one engine company. What we do is we bring all the other outside resources and those part of North County Fire to accomplish getting, besides the 3 that arrive, we get the additional people to make up, including a chief officer and other chief officers to supervise. There's a whole bunch of tasks that get done when you respond to any emergency, and it takes the right number of those people to do those to try and mitigate an EMS call or a fire call and keep it from expanding and or growing. You're trying to knock that incident down before it gets big. And that kind of rolls back to the inspection piece that we don't want fires. If we do get fires, we want those protection systems to hold those fires so they don't get very big and we can come in and take care of it. If you didn't do inspections, you didn't have any kind of pre-fire engineering going on, your building could have a fire and then you're going to the other buildings and so on and so forth. So that's the importance of what we do from that standpoint. I think is that the end? It must be. So I didn't know if I rolled into the next person's or not. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Of course, this is a little different approach, as the finance director said, than we normally have done. So tried to give you the context of just a couple of the programs that we're doing, and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, council questions. Start with you, Cliff.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Chief Myers, thanks for coming down today and giving us that brief overview. So, just going to pages 139 and 140, yeah, Stuart had shown us the little bubble, like outbreaks of trying to describe what's in these budgets, or what's in each area, trying to, are we achieving our goals, things like that. You deal with 3 cities, right? So 3 different budgets. How is this one different, and what are if there are any strengths in the way that we're doing this to make sure that we're spending the money wisely and achieving our goals?
Well, I think that all 3 have the same, idea of trying to be efficient with the dollars, the elected officials and that. I don't see a difference between the 3 there. They generally all try and look at, are we being effective in the programs or the policies or the things that we're doing. So I don't really see a big difference as it relates to that. I just think it might be a different approach and what's comfortable for each of those elected officials as it relates to how they determine the level of funding that they want to provide for fire services within that community.
So when you look at these little pop outs here? Does it make you think, a little bit like more in depth and as opposed to if they weren't there?
No, to be honest with you. We generally come to you with stats because we're more of an organization that kind of operates off of goals and statistics. So generally we'd come in here and show you how quickly we responded, how many inspections, all those kinds of various things that we do in order to keep our people prepared and or to respond and how that looks. I think these might be something that would allow you to maybe ask a question about what it is that you would have a question about a particular program. Is it meeting the needs of the community, type of a thing?
Yeah.
I believe it does. We always look at having more is better, but that's a determination based upon the amount of resources.
Sure, yeah, you have to have that balance. So that gets to my next question. So we have these three cities, Brisbane, Pacifica, and Daly City. I don't go to the Daly City council meetings, but I am in contact with folks who are on the council, people who work with the administration, and so there are concerns about Daly City's financial well-being into the future, and so Daly City is the biggest partner in this JPA, and so if there are financial problems with the city in the near future, that could have potentially impacts on us. So can you just
the challenges that were described by the finance director are the same challenges in all three of the cities in terms of funding into the future. And the vast majority of what we spend our money on is our employees in order to provide the service. As it relates to North County Fire in the three cities, the nice thing about North County Fire was that each of those determined the level of services they want to provide within their city. We then take that and make it in such a way that we can help each other. And it's not just us. It's not just North County. We get help from South City. We go from here all the way down to Menlo Park when they get big fires. So it's kind of a countywide approach of delivering fire services in this county. We're almost like a county fire department the way we function for response purposes. So that's a good thing. But last year, God, time flies. I believe it was last year we eliminated an engine company in Daly City. So that didn't make a void in the system as far as a district. There's still a fire company there responding out of it. We just have one less fire company. And we haven't seen that as a trend. I don't see that. This year there was no reductions to the fire budget within Daly City as far as services are concerned. Pacifica, the same thing. So I think that was a modification in order to get through some difficult financial times. I don't see it as clearing up completely going forward, but we'll see.
Okay. All right. So in the next couple of years, we probably looking good.
Yeah. I don't see a degradation. Whatever occurs in the others, I don't see a degradation necessarily in any fire services
that would impact our residents.
City of Brisbane.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good question, Cliff. Karen?
No, I have none right now.
Okay. Madison?
What's a sinking fund?
So, just to give the history on it, years and years ago, we would come to the city council and say, wow, we have to buy brand new personal equipment, and it usually was generally a large number, and nobody would be prepared for it. So we asked probably 16, 17 years ago, let's start putting money away based on all those items that we need to buy. So when the useful life of that item comes up, we just have the money there, we bring it as part of the budget, and we tap into that so that we've planned for it all at once.
That's what I thought it was, but I just wanted to make sure, kind of like how we do our vehicle replacement.
Yes, exact
sort of
same
fund.
thing, only it's a subgroup within the fire department for a whole list of things that we can put money away for and plan for it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's been a very evolutionary process, through the budget, through the years, and I think we're doing pretty well now, as I think it's Stuart's overview of putting money aside in different sinking funds and kind of doing that with the marina too. Harry, you got?
So on the actual budget fund, the proposed 18-19 versus the approved budget of 17-18, it looks as if one of the large areas of difference is in benefits and the other is in supplies and services. Is the supplies and services, because I'm not really seeing where it's broken down here easily.
Oh, yeah.
Is that including the new fire engine or?
No, under North County Fire Authority is probably the largest item in there. That's the 396 paid in there. From the 17-18 to this point, there was increases that occurred. One, sharing the cost of a new position, and then just kind of the cost that you approved the other day as part of the North County Fire Authority.
Okay, so that was an unanticipated addition to a
It was planned
support
for, yeah, planned for.
But well, okay. And then the capital or the benefits, that's just due to what our PERS and.
So the benefits, probably the finance director, but I'm assuming that's just that PERS and healthcare and those kinds of items increasing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of capital expenditures that we didn't have in 16-17, but then approved basically 20,000 in current budget and
I may need
20,000
some
in next
help
budget.
as it relates to that, and I'm not I believe that could be the replacement fund. Is it broke out as a replacement fund that goes in there? Sure.
Oh, that's probably what it is.
I'll definitely look.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And then
I'm
the
I'm
40
glad we've got it in there. I just wanted to make sure. 'Cause
It's been in there every year. That's why I kind of, when I saw that there wasn't one in 16-17, I'm not exactly sure why, but it's been there every year for lots of years.
Because it's an actual expenditure, so it doesn't get spent. It goes into the sinking fund. So it drops down into fund balance. Then 17-18 it's still approved for it. And then in 18-19 it's for the $40,000 for the equipment that Ron talked about. So $20,500 would be the sinking fund, and then the other remainder would come out of the sinking fund that we've set aside from the previous years.
Well, and just to add that, this is a year where we are buying protective clothing. So there's that's part of that 40,000, I believe. Correct? Yeah, that's why it jumped up. So you have the 20,000 going in, but then we're pulling money out to buy all new protective all across North County. We buy it all together at one time. So
Get a breaking price out.
yeah, we get it. That's been one of the benefits for all these years is the economy of scale and the fact that we have been able to reduce cost and we can make large purchases together and get a better price on things. So that's some of the indirect savings and benefit of the North County Fire Authority. And it goes the same for grants. We're able to get when we get grants for all three, more of a regional kind of an approach as opposed to just one singular.
Yeah, I also noticed for Brisbane, when one of the engines goes into some heavy maintenance, that we borrow an engine from Daly City.
Yeah,
And that's
fact,
really nice.
The reserve engine, we made a decision and we call it 181, not spend any more money on it because it's not worth it. So we've taken another reserve engine, and we use them between all three. We've moved, and you'll see a Daly City on it, but it's permanently here to be available until we get the new replacement engine, but we didn't see any need to be spending huge amounts of money on a reserve engine. It just wasn't worth it to do that. And we'll take the frontline engine and put it in reserve, so we'll have a good reserve, and then we'll also have a new engine. It takes a year for that engine to get, so even though we're going out to purchase it, it'll be a year before it shows up. It takes that long to build it and bring it in. So in the year to come, we'll have that other engine reserved there to utilize when the frontline engine goes in for its normal maintenance or any repairs.
Is it spec'd out?
It is. That's the other thing. We buy the same type of apparatus for all three cities. So we have a spec that we use. So we don't go adding more cost into one just because somebody thinks it looks, it'd be a neat thing to do.
Whistles and bells.
That's the same thing with our protective gear. We get what we need and what is functional. We just don't try and be different just to be different in all three. We buy the same thing for all three, most everything we do. So.
Having the same engine and having less training on different engine types I'm sure is helpful.
Yeah,
when,
true.
When personnel go to use the equipment and they're called to another fire, they're familiar with that equipment.
Yeah, and really nowadays it's so automated. One of the biggest problems with new fire apparatus, we'd actually prefer to have the 30-year because it was just pulling valves and moving gears. Now it's all computer boards, and when those go bad, that's what the problem ends up being. We end up having fire apparatus out of service because it's not really the mechanical. We call it mechanical, but it's some electronic piece of it.
So there's no backup, right? There's no.
Not really.
So, like,
No, it's not like, we used
digitally, it doesn't work. You can't go to manual.
No, it's supposed to be better. We actually don't prefer it, but that's what it is now. So yeah.
Any more questions, Terry?
No, thank you.
I had one, Ron. I wanted to know about our new attack unit that we have. How's that working out? And do we use that for more medical responses?
It actually was primarily designed for, and one of the first photos you saw was the fire that occurred some years ago, 2008. That's primarily what that's going to be. It's going to allow us to get off-road, get up while a fire's small, and be able to stop a fire. That's not what it's had a secondary effect, and that is that when we've had hikers or people that have gotten off trail, we've had the ability to get that up in that same area and potentially move a patient from one place to the next. So we have it there. We pretty much, you'll see where it may be trailing the engine, so that especially summertime, wintertime we won't. Summertime it'll trail. So if we get a wildland fire, vegetation fire, we will have it with them in case they're going to training or they're going wherever it is they need to go. But yeah, it's primarily so we can deal with wildland vegetation fires, but it does have the ability to get off road and move a patient if we need to on that.
Okay. Does it respond? Because I haven't really seen, really haven't had much, and I guess it's probably, knock on wood, going on recently, even medical issues that I haven't really heard a whole lot.
So it isn't a medical response unit.
Okay.
It got utilized on an incident over here because somebody was off in an area that it could get into, and is more beneficial than trying to hand carry somebody out type of a thing.
Yeah.
So it won't respond to medicals as a matter of a response. It's primarily a wildland fire suppression unit that gets into areas that the fire engines can't get in. This can pump and roll, which means we can be walking with it or running with it and putting out fire. Engines have to come to a complete stop, and then we extend hose lines to go fight wildland fires. So that's the benefit of this unit.
Yeah, nice unit. I mean, it's beautiful. Just
yeah. So we're it's here for that fire that happened in 2008. We had no ability to get off road. The only ones that we have that can get off road would be CAL FIRE type of engines that come in and do that. But their response is a long ways. And getting now aircraft helps and all other kinds of things that go into play, but this would allow us to actually get right up in there when it was about a half-acre fire and hadn't caught the wind, and we'll take the crews and throw them onto that vehicle. It can carry can it carry 6 or is it 4? 4 or 5. So what we'll do is we'll take 2 engines. We'll take the 81 engine, the 93 engine. They'll jump in. It has hand tools. It has all kinds of other things that we can do to try and minimize the spread of that fire pretty quickly and not have it come down and have to utilize our fire break or expose our community here in Brisbane to fire.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Ron.
Thanks.
Have a safe trip
Thanks.
home.
Thank you.
I'll be heading up there tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. That brings us to Community Development Department. John.
I think pizza got delivered. I think the pizza got delivered.
Oh. Okay. Council's pleasure. What's council? Huh?
How long is this?
Short, very short.
Well, then let's.
Okay, I say John's up here. Let's just do it.
Okay.
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 All right.
Since you're up there.
Good morning. I'll keep this brief.
Afternoon now. Well, technically.
Point well taken. Okay.
Yes, John.
Let's see if I.
In my time, it's still morning, though.
Same.
My head
Okay. Again, Good afternoon, council members, mayor. I'll do a real quick summary. Again, this is a little different budget presentation format. So again, if you have questions or something that goes beyond what I do, feel free to jump in. I think you're all pretty familiar with the organization. We handle both the planning and building side. Building side primarily through the administration of contract with CSG, our outside consultant. And I just wanted to highlight, in the structure that you're looking at in terms of commission and council support, the one item that's of particular interest to us this year at a staff level is with the number of new planning commissioners we have, sort of developing some capacity building with them and their confidence in dealing with some of the planning issues that they may be seeing in the next couple of years. So we are spending a lot of effort and time both with in-house training with the city attorney and staff, as well as trying to get them to as many outside, League of Cities training, other local professional opportunities they arise, and they're very receptive to that as well. So we've had a lot of good experience with that.
Good.
And again, tying it back to some of the council objectives, we really think it does promote, the idea of community building, ecological sustainability, and economic development, all in their wheelhouse or issues that they will see over the next couple of years. So I just wanted to highlight that. The other kind of thing I want to point out was some of the activities and trends and, that we may see over the next budget cycle of 2 years. Clearly, it's no surprise to anybody in this room about the level of building permit activity, that's occurred in the high level. This just illustrates, of the valuation of building permits issued in the last several fiscal years. Just 17, 18, we're not even through yet, and we're up to 70 million in valuation compared to, again, it's nearly a fourfold increase over historic rates here. So I want to point that out. Again, some of the big projects you've probably heard of or seen is HCP, the biotech down in Sierra Point. Sangamo is another tenant improvement for a company in taking the old Dakin building in Sierra Point as well, and the Amazon Fresh on Valley Drive. So there were some of the bigger value TIs or building permits that were issued over the last fiscal year. And I expect we'll see a trend of additional heavy building activity for the short term. Again, then some of the other sort of preview of things that we're aware of or we're going to keep an eye out in the future in terms of planning applications on private development. The Sierra Point Parcel 3, which is the former Opus office, is looking at a conversion of that to a biotech R&D campus site. So that would be something that the Planning Commission will be reviewing in the near future. The Baylands, I don't think we need to talk about that this afternoon. Talk about that plenty of other times. And then the quarry, we've had a number of, a lot of inquiries about people who want to buy the quarry for future development. These tend to come and go, but certainly it's under active discussion currently, and, this may be something that comes to fruition over the next budget cycle as well. And then housing, in terms of as it translates to the activity we see, we're seeing an uptick on accessory dwelling unit construction. I don't have the statistics in front of me, a lot more interest in that. I don't know if it's really shown yet in terms of permits issued, but there are a number of property owners who are interested in taking advantage of those code provisions. And this is something that's you'll see, and it's coming up just more immediately, is infill in the R3 zone. We have people with a single-family residence, and they're looking at tearing down their single-family residence, going in with a triplex or 4 units. Planning Commission actually has a couple of those kind of items in their upcoming agenda. So as property values are what they are, we may be seeing more of that in the near term than we've historically seen. Lastly, city-initiated programs. I don't really have anything in particular. We're on a constant basis trying to keep ahead with state law, keep up with state law, especially with what they change with housing law. That often has implications on our zoning ordinance requirements, and we're looking at actually amending our zoning ordinance to bring it into compliance with the last round of housing bills that were approved last year. And again, part of what we do is try to actively monitor what is going on at state legislation to try to keep up with that and advise the council if there are other changes to our local ordinances that are required.
It's a
Then
new
probably-
game in California, housing roulette, right? They just roll it.
Exactly, or
Like that.
yeah, exactly. Like the blindfold is on half the time. You never know how they're going to turn out. Then sort of larger city-initiated programs, again, probably won't be this budget cycle, but certainly there'll be a gear up for yet another housing element, which is always a favorite activity. That'll be something that shows up in the next 2-year budget, certainly in terms of the resources that are spent and required to do that. With that, and Stuart had mentioned this is really our only fairly minimal budgetary requirement is we're holding our old building permit records on a antiquated technology, basically obsolete technology of microfiche. So we did go ahead and upgrade that into an electronic storage format, so it's a lot more accessible to the public. And we're trying to make sure that stays current because we are going with electronic permitting as currently. So we're trying to have an integrated database so people don't have to search multiple databases for building permit activity, and that's being cloud hosted at the moment, and we foresee that into the near future. With that, I'd entertain any questions you have.
Terry, let's start with you.
I suggest for this. So much of the community development. Sorry. When we've heard about the budget in the past, the community development, a lot of it has been, is that including, we're talking planning department. Is this the net amount, or is some of this cost offset by plan fees?
The cost is offset by plan fees. This is the net. This is the gross amount of expenditures that we anticipate.
I'm sorry, what?
It's the gross amount.
Okay.
So we anticipate about, we budget for around 100,000, 115,000 every year in revenues. As you can only imagine, this year we're doing much better in revenues. But we also anticipate next year's expenditures are going to go up because a number of the building permits are going to be more than finished this year. So we will have collected money one year, and then we will spend money the next year.
So this is one of the programs that's offset by revenue?
Yes.
And do we have just a basic offset number, since it doesn't show in this document as such? You can say no.
No, we do. I just have to flip to the right page. That's all. On page 40, and page 39. So 39, we anticipate about 150,000 in building permit revenue, and we anticipate, I'm looking for plan check, and about 115,000 in plan checks, and those are about what we anticipate every year. But as you imagine, as building goes up, we'll get more money in, and at mid-year we would let you know that.
Okay. It just would be nice to have that for future budgets. I'm not saying this time around, but anticipated offsets, because then we can, when you're looking at priority budgeting, you can say, well, we're budgeting 1.2 million, we're getting 3 million back, so the remaining services are where we have options for what's priority. So it just would be nice to have maybe a separate box on the final page of the overview that reflected, just like in Park and Rec, where we're going to have anticipation of money coming back in from fees. So it's not that we're just expending all of this for one particular department, and it would make it easier for me to have it there on the box.
The revenue source.
Right. Okay, so
Well, not even the revenue sources, just anticipated fees that are going to offset that amount.
Right.
It just would make it easier for me.
I'll include that next time.
Great, thank you.
Madison,
I don't have any questions.
Karen,
I don't have any questions.
Clifford?
I just have just a couple here. John, thank you. And then also, I just want to, say that, I think the support that you've been giving the council, as we go through this plans process has been great. Providing the the map with the little foam blocks, and whenever we need support, to get data, you and your department have just gotten it to us, right away. So, thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that the new planning commissioners are eager to learn. I mean, we have some, really, smart, engaging people, and, they bring with them some excellent skills. So acquiring those planning commissioner skills seems like, they'll absorb it really well. And so the League of California Cities, is it an annual event or is it biannual?
It's annual.
It's annual, okay. And how many?
We had two commissioners who were able to make it this year. The problem was the appointments. By the time the appointments came along, the conference was 2 weeks out, both for registration and for scheduling. It was difficult for the new commissioners. So I expect we'll get, hopefully, if not all three next year, who haven't been, at least two of those three to next year's conference. I'd like to get all three there.
You've been doing some in-house training too, right? Okay.
Correct.
And then the web hosting is so people from the comfort of their own home, they could go to the city's website, and they don't have to do it here. It's
right now it is. We're still trying to work the bugs out. Right now it's here still, but it's on a screen-based. So someone can basically get it loaded on the screen, and then they can get what they need. There are issues with proprietary information when it comes to building permit records about viewing and what you can view versus what you can copy, and we're trying to work out some of those sort of technical issues before we can roll it out to somebody can just sort of search those online and at their own, because we do have to be able to control what can be printed, which is a challenge.
Yeah, also people just pull out their smartphone and okay, I'm gonna take a picture of this and.
Yeah, I know there are certain. I mean, that's the problem with some of these intersection of law. Proprietary law and technology that don't fit well together anymore.
Okay. And then I guess these are two questions for Stuart in regards to this. So, the construction activity has increased considerably from the last couple of years, and $70 million compared to 10 and 15 or 12 or whatever. Yeah. So, and I know we touched briefly upon that earlier, Stuart. But these are things that you don't put in your 5-year budget, or you wait until they're more secure before you actually put them into anticipated revenue?
I wait until they're on the ground and built.
Until they're on the ground, okay.
Because you never quite know how the assessor is going to assess it, no matter what the building permits say.
Okay, all right. And then, I know we don't want to talk about the balance, but we've been doing all this ramping up, and we're putting a lot of energy into it. Where are we with UPC? Covering some of these costs that we're putting out in regards to analyzing their project.
I mean, they're making their payments as we anticipate them making their payments. So, I mean, those things that we can bill for, we do. Those things that are more related to city costs, we pay for out of the general fund.
Sure. Have our costs increased considerably over the last year compared to previous years? Or is it
no, I mean
consistent?
It's probably been a little bit less from what because if you think about doing the document itself,
the EIR.
Yeah, sure. The EIR was $2 million.
Our consultant costs have gone down a little bit because of where we are in the work. Whether the city has sort of independent costs, I defer to Stuart.
Right. No, I mean the amount of the putting together the draft EIR and the final EIR was much more time intensive from a consultant perspective.
That's true. Now we're working off that document
rather
than building it.
Mm-hmm. And I would assume that a lot of the costs in this process are more with our legal and supportive costs for the council than it is for the community development department. So that might be addressed when we get to the legal budget, instead of being necessarily in community development budget.
All right, thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, hold on, John.
Sorry.
I got a question.
Lunchtime, Mark, we didn't need.
Pizza waiting?
He knows how your mind thinks, Clark.
Amazon Fresh, that's a food delivery service?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, it's more their distribution, it's a distribution type.
Distribution center?
Yeah.
So they are taking over the old Monster Cable building, is that right? Is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So how many employees are projected?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure how
Okay,
many
yeah.
on-site versus, I think more of a distribution than a real on-site
Yeah.
office population is my recollection.
Yeah, because I
I'll get back to you
know
on that.
Monster had like, at one point in time, like 500 employees there.
Yeah, it's
I didn't-
more space-intensive, warehouse-intensive than
Okay.
office-intensive.
All right.
I know they're hiring like crazy, that's all I can tell you.
Hmm?
They're hiring like crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, somebody had asked me about that.
I'll find that out and get back to you.
Okay, all right, very good. So, thank you very much, John, for all that you do, and I know it's been a busy time, so, yeah. Council's pleasure, do you want to make this a working lunch, or do you want to take 30 minutes? What's the play?
I would rather not eat on camera.
Why not?
How about,
Just turn your microphone off. No. Okay, all right, that's fine, huh?
how about just 15 or 20 minutes?
Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll take 30 minutes in, and food's here, so help yourself.